Hello ladies and latents, and welcome to another countdown. If you're playing a video game and you're going to receive a weapon, there are some basics to be expected. If you aren't forced to use your mitts or a gun, you're probably going to be handed a sharp, shiny sword, and probably from someone you would never in hell trust in the real world. The sword is a traditional and generally effective weapon, used throughout the ages in both the real world and the world of fiction. Because of its balance and practicality, it stands as a fine weapon for use in most games. That said, there are some swords that do a better job on the battlefield than others, and some that are more fun to use. So here I'll be counting down not necessarily what I feel are the best swords in gaming, but rather my favorites. Whether it's for their design, usability, something to do with the lore, or just how much fun it is to swing, these are my favorite swords in gaming. The usual rules apply, only one sword for each represented franchise and only from games I've played. And most obviously, for an entry to get on this list, it has to be a sword. No shit, right? Well, that's all that needs to be stated here. I figure we're ready to get this rolling. That's not a Nintendo game. Get out of here. All joking aside, the Halo series is full of creative weapons. The Chief's arsenal is full of effective guns, a hammer, whatever the shit these vehicles are, and starting in Halo 2, an alien sword. The Type 1 energy sword, simply known as the energy sword by Halo fans and non-fans, is a deadly melee weapon. Manufactured by the Covenant Empire, the energy sword is meant to be used exclusively by the Sangheili, otherwise known as the Elites. A fail-safe mechanism exists in the hilt so that the original wielder is the only one who can use it. However, this mechanism is rarely seen in use. There's some lore bits about Forerunner symbols and marrying the swords, but as someone who isn't a regular Halo fan, none of this matters to me. I'm in it for the weapon itself, and this is a weapon I can get behind. In all my playtime with the Halo series, this is a go-to weapon for me. If I see it, I always drop something to pick it up because it's way more fun than any of the other weapons. While it won't always be a one-hit kill, this thing is very effective against enemy soldiers and players alike. Cutting through opponents and wiping them out or scoring an easy one-hit kill from behind is very satisfying. And in the multiplayer, you can get sword clashes going and have epic beam sword duels to your favorite Star Wars music. However, it isn't without its disadvantages. First and most obviously, it is a melee ranged weapon, so unless you're gonna go for an opponent who's unarmed or has shit aim, you're gonna have a good chance of getting shot, maybe even killed. The energy sword also has a shot limit, so for every time you cut into someone, you do end up using battery power. It's a shame that even the melee weapons have ammunition, but I guess if they didn't, they'd be pretty overpowered. But even with these disadvantages, the energy sword never stops looking really, really cool. Hey, remember when everyone thought Magnus was a shoo-in for Smash? Haha, good times. Despite being assigned to the role of assist trophy, he still brought the pain with his big-ass sword, otherwise known as the Magnus Club. Introduced in Kid Icarus Uprising, this club is the signature weapon of the aforementioned Magnus, who appears in Chapter 2 of the game. Despite him being human, Magnus is strong enough to wield this enormous sword and powerful enough to fight underworld forces. In the hands of Magnus, it appears to be a formidable weapon. Wouldn't it be neat if you could wield it for yourself? Well, wouldn't you know it, you can. There are two situations in which you can wield this weapon. There's Chapter 18, where you play as Magnus himself, but you can also obtain this weapon to wield in normal gameplay as Pit. Surprisingly, Pit's better with the weapon than the original owner. Chalk it up to Pit having more dexterity compared to Magnus's intense muscles. Despite the Magnus Club having the single shortest range of any weapon, it also stands as one of the best weapons in the game at melee range. Doesn't give you a lot of options when it comes to fighting enemies or other players, but god damn, this thing hits hard. Being classified as a club, it comes as no surprise that it's a very heavy weapon, but with a sharp edge and an aerodynamic design, it can cut enemies like any sword can. Using the Magnus Club may not be your best option, especially if you're going to dabble in the multiplayer, but if you can get around its shortcomings, it's a very potent, albeit unorthodox weapon. Because of its unconventional strengths, the Magnus Club is one of my favorite weapons in Uprising, among the Beam Claws, Aurum Club, and other miscellaneous weapons. And as an aside, if anyone tries to argue the legitimacy of this entry, what with it being classified as a club and all, well, I guess I'll just have to cut that argument down. You open a video like this and among your first thoughts is the Master Sword. I mean, it's a pretty obvious choice, right? It's the iconic... Fuck it, you already know I'm faking you out. Bring in the big Goron sword. Don't get me wrong, the Master Sword is great. Sword of Evil's Bane, slick looking design, and it stabs people in the face good. But what if that's not enough? What if you need a little more oomph? Well, if you want to do that, you have two options. Pay out the ass for the Giant's Knife, a mistake by the way, or go on a lengthy side quest for the big Goron sword. After peddling around random shit that ranges from a chicken to eye drops, you're handed one of the strongest weapons in Zelda history. And from there, the game bends over and lets you have your way with it. It's hard to say the big Goron sword is totally overpowered considering you have to give up your main method of defense, your shield, to use it, but with double damage of the Master Sword, it walks a fine line. On paper, dropping your shield for the sake of doing more damage sounds like a perfect balance, but after a few minutes with this, you won't be missing the shield very dearly. The sword cuts down enemies, mini-bosses, and even some actual bosses like they're nothing, so it begs the question of whether or not it's a balanced weapon. Fuck if I care though, this shit is fun. If you thought the mini-bosses like Dark Link and the Iron Knuckle were fun before, try taking this out for a spin. By giving you that boosted attack power, it takes what were fights to keep up with the opponent and forces the opponent to keep up with you. And like I said before, it takes out actual bosses easier than you'd expect it to. The big Goron Sword's jump attack is the single strongest strike in the game, so using that will make quick work of pretty much anything. It may not be able to take out the final boss properly, but if there were ever a sword worth using over the Master Sword, this would be the one for the job. I'm sure you've seen plenty around the web lately about this Kojima guy, a company called Konami, a little franchise known as Metal Gear, and how all three of them are collectively in the shitter. While it's a crying shame that things have to be this way, at least we'll always have Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. When the world falls into chaos, some people choose to use guns, others use nukes, and then there's people like Raiden who bring swords into the mix. Something to keep in mind is that the high-frequency blade is not a weapon unique to Raiden. However, his sword has a few unique characteristics when compared to the other cyborg ninjas throughout the series, so I'll be talking about his specifically. That out of the way, Raiden's high-frequency blade is a fascinating piece of technology. Charged with electricity and constantly vibrating, it's a sword capable of cutting through things and breaking them down at the molecular level. Due to its resonance, it can weaken the bonds between molecules, making them easier to cut through. This is why it's able to cut through the hull of a Metal Gear like it's trimming hedges. Everything from cyborg goons to helicopters, it makes no difference what it's made of, this sword can cut it down to itty-bitty pieces. The high-frequency blade also shows shocking amounts of durability when performing defensive maneuvers. Despite being thin and not having a lot of coverage, holding the sword just so allows you to block almost any attack. Goodness knows what it's made of, but it sure is sturdy, and with enough speed and dexterity, the wielder can deflect or even cut through bullets. What makes Raiden's high-frequency blade stand out is its ability to absorb electrolytes while it strikes enemies, filling Raiden's fuel cells. And when the fuel cells are full, you're presented with one of two options. Go into blade mode to cut precisely or wildly shred enemies, or ripper mode to unleash general havoc. I was never one for Beyblades, but letting it rip with this sword is a bloody good time. Fire Emblem is a series of swords of all kinds. There's the iconic and mythical stuff like Falchion and Ragnall, then there's the Levin sword with its magical properties and appearance in Smash, and then there's the sword I decided to include on this list, the Killing Edge. Anyone who's played a Fire Emblem game will immediately be able to relate to this one. The killer weapons are notorious for being some of the best equipment in the Fire Emblem series, often bordering on overpowered. The question is, why? At face value, the Killing Edge probably just looks like an ordinary katana, and looking closer, that's exactly what it is, an ordinary katana. And because it's an ordinary katana, it has properties that some of the more basic, heavier swords do not. Katanas are very thin and lightweight swords, traditionally averaging at 2 to 3 pounds in weight. This makes them very maneuverable compared to other swords with wider blades, making those who wield them swifter in combat. This translates over to Fire Emblem very well, with them having very little weight in the games that have weaponry weight. This means units wielding them will be more likely to dual strike and more likely to avoid enemy attacks. It doesn't have the highest might of the lot, but considering the lighter weight, I'd wager that's understandable, not to mention it makes up for that with one other statistic. Another common trait of katanas is that they are very, very sharp. In Fire Emblem, the Killing Edge takes this sharp property and runs with it, leaving it with a natural crit rate higher than any other weapons in the game. If they wanted to make up for a lack of might, they sure as hell did it. This crazy natural crit chance combined with a unit with high skill has the potential to make units completely broken, especially if they have higher speed to give them the opportunity to hit twice. It's nuts how high some units' damage output can be when wielding a Killing Edge. Myrmidon and Thief units get to use these at maximum efficiency, especially Swordmasters, who can very easily get crit chances of over 50% just by wielding the weapon. You want to tip the scales and make short work of enemy units? Toss that Levin sword, pick up a Killing Edge, and cut some fucking heads. One of Generation 6's most popular Pokemon among the likes of Greninja and Hawlucha, the Honedge line stands as one of Pokemon's most fascinating concepts in years, despite having an absurdly simple design. I've gotta admit, I wasn't too thrilled with Honedge when it was first revealed, or Doublade for that matter. Shoot, even Aegislash never piqued my interest when I first heard about it. But doing some digging around showed me these Pokemon are worth their salt, both in stats and in the lore. Looking at their move pool shows a high number of moves that center around cutting, no shit. With moves like Fury Cutter, Night Slash, Aerial Ace, and Shadow Claw, they're capable of cutting through several different kinds of Pokemon. And for the coup de grace, their Sacred Sword, a move previously exclusive to the Musketeers of Unova. The sword aspect of their design shines through in what they can do in battle, and that's pretty clever if I do say so myself. Honedge, Doublade, and Aegislash might look like great weapons to wield in battle, they are swords after all, but you'd better let them fight valiantly for you rather than trying to hold them. According to the Pokedex, Honedge has the ability to drain the life force of anyone who tries to grab their hilt. Yikes. Move on to the other Pokedex entries, and Doublade and Aegislash are made increasingly more badass. Doublade uses telepathy between the two swords to coordinate swift attacks that even expert swordsmen can't stop, and Aegislash plays Excalibur by detecting leadership qualities and deciding the kings of ancient times. All that's nice, but the soul draining thing is pretty off-putting, so I'll stay back here and let these guys fight for me. Aegislash's hilt is too fat to hold anyway, so no point in bothering there. Looking at the anime and games respectively, Galaxia is either a sword forged by the gods, or a mythical gold-pronged sword wielded by one of gaming's most notable swordsmen. Though, can Meta Knight really be called a swordsman? No matter which way you slice it, Galaxia is definitely deserving of a spot on this list. Wielded by Meta Knight since Kirby Superstar, over the years it's taken its place as one of the most iconic weapons in the Kirby series. Galaxia is a small gold sword with spikes lining the edges, giving it the appearance of a solid flame. This flame-like design coincides with its powers, as it's more than just a fancy-looking short sword. Galaxia has a variety of magical properties, shown to their fullest potential when it's wielded by Meta Knight. By absorbing energy from fallen enemies, it can grant Meta Knight swifter movement speed, heal him, and unleash the vicious Mach Tornado. Along with the Mach Tornado, the sword can fire other projectiles in the form of standard sword beams and energy waves. Its power makes it a threatening presence in battle when wielded by anyone, no matter who they are or what they face. While you get to play as Meta Knight in a number of different games and wield the sword, there's only been one time where Galaxia has been wielded by Kirby. In Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, Galaxia goes by the title of the Master Sword, and this is without a doubt my favorite appearance of the weapon. If I had included final abilities in my top 20 copy abilities, this would have taken the #1 spot effortlessly. The description of the Master Sword reads, "Almighty Sword. It can be used on all puzzles, and it isn't exaggerating. With its fiery energy and various special moves, the Master Sword can be used in any situation you want, combat or otherwise." While it's literally godly powerful in the show and its in-game appearance pales in comparison, Galaxia still stands as Dreamland's most powerful weapon. The golden sheen is well deserved for a weapon of this caliber. No matter what it is he's fighting for, Zero has always carried his trusty ZSaber into battle with him. Since Mega Man X2, there hasn't been an appearance without it, and it's not hard to see why, as it adds an element to his design that makes it feel complete. Zero with a Buster just doesn't seem right. The ponytail, the sharper design, it's like an opposite to Mega Man. So to take it the extra mile, make him the opposite to Mega Man in gameplay as well, by giving him a sword and forcing him to get up close and personal with enemies. The sword brings everything together, tying up his design in a nice little bow. And because it's a laser sword, you bet your ass it looks cool regardless of who's wielding it. In the X series, it's similar to your standard beam sword from anything, but with a sharper curved design, akin to that of a katana. In the Zero series, it has a more angular design, looking like the head of his spear, which I'd argue looks better than the original design. With every appearance, it has a very fluid look to it when it's swung, rather than staying as a solid blade. And it may be a minute detail, but the colors chosen for the ZSaber are very appealing. Whether it's teal, green, or purple, swinging this sword looks simply awesome. As for what it can do, the ZSaber has had a number of different abilities throughout the franchise. In X2 and X3, it's a pretty simple weapon that can be used in conjunction with charge shot combos. In X4 and onwards, whenever you're given the option to play as Zero, the ZSaber is his primary weapon, rather than being used in conjunction with a Buster. With a variety of different combos and special techniques, the ZSaber is a deadly weapon in the right hands. As if this weren't enough, like X and his Buster, the ZSaber can gain abilities as you progress through the game. There are options for attaching elements to it so that it can be more effective in different situations, the occasional projectile technique for ranged options, and a variety of other techniques that you couldn't pronounce even if you tried. Though I will admit, looking into the translations, the names of these special moves are super badass. Ice Wolf Fang, Heaven Rending Blade, Cutting in Two with a single stroke. Okay, that last one's kind of wordy, but I'd hate to be in the way of a blade that can cut me in half with a single strike. I like my organs on my inside, where they belong, thank you. When it comes to swords in Monster Hunter, there's a little something for everyone. You go with the classic sword and board, you could go with the logic that two swords are better than one, you could use a really long sword, or you could be a vanilla piece of shit like me and use the most basic, but debatably the most applicable of the bunch, the Great Sword. I could very well be reamed by Monster Hunter fanatics for this, but my weapon of choice in Monster Hunter is the hulking slab of metal on a stick. It's a very basic weapon in design, with a long, wide blade that packs a lot of weight to it. Its different varieties take the simplicity of the design and run with it to provide some really badass looking weapons. Some of my personal favorites look-wise include the Nursilla, Shagaru, and Sideus blades. As far as gameplay goes, the Great Sword is once again very simple, but in a rather deceptive way. You have your basic vertical strike and horizontal swipe, which you can chain together for combos, and you can also charge the blade to release stronger attacks. This sounds pretty simple, but the properties of some of these attacks can take the Great Sword from an easy-to-wield, albeit sluggish weapon and turn whoever wields it into a monster of their own right. For starters, this smacking attack here can do impact damage, and a lot of it. Because of the Great Sword's base power, that impact damage makes for a great supplement to the impact damage of others, helping to leave monsters fatigued or even knock them out. Another thing the Great Sword has going for it, thanks to its massive power, is an easy way to knock monsters over or break parts. And you know that lack of mobility I brought up a moment ago? With correct timing, Great Sword wielders can cancel their end lag by rolling out of attacks. This certainly doesn't make you swift-footed, but with something this heavy, take what you can get as far as mobility. Or if you aren't the dodging type, hold up your sword and use one of the best blocks in the game. With a very, very wide hitbox, the Great Sword can block almost any attack that isn't coming from behind. It's almost absurd how well it works for blocking, with its only drawback being that using it lowers sharpness. With a lot going for it in a wide number of areas, the Great Sword is my primary weapon of choice whenever I'm out on a hunt. I may use dual blades as a secondary, but when the going gets tough, I stand my ground and block everything.
Minato's power!
I'd be lying if I said this weren't the reason I was making this list. Having recently played Xenoblade Chronicles on the 3DS and thoroughly enjoying myself, I needed an excuse to talk about it, and damn it, I found one. So let's talk about one of the most important things in this game. As far as its place in the game's story, this sword is just as important as the mechon, the world around you, and even the main characters. It's constantly an important subject matter, and as such, talking about it ad nauseum would result in massive spoiling of this game's plot. Something that I'm sure people would shred me for doing, so let's cut the spoilers. When Dunban wielded the Minato in the opening through sheer force of will, its capabilities are pretty limited. Yeah, he fought off the Mechon army almost single-handedly. Oh, that's just in bad taste. But his knowledge of how it works is pretty limited. As such, he only has a couple of arts at his disposal. When Shulk picks it up, it opens up its full potential for him to use on his command. When wielded by Shulk, the Minato grants him the ability to see into the future. That alone makes this sword outclass pretty much everything else on this list. What's better than a sword that can cut you in half with a single blow? A sword that lets you see every attack coming and gives you all the tools you'll need to avoid it. At its base form, it may be limited by its inability to cut people, but as far as swords go, I dare you to find something with more uses than the Minato. Like every other character in the game, Shulk has a list of arts unique to him, things like backslash and air slash. However, unlike other characters, he does not have a talent art. Instead, Shulk has a second list of arts supplied by the Minato, and hot damn, what a list of arts. With enchant, you can grant your allies the ability to damage mechons. With shield, you can block enemy arts. With speed, you can dodge enemy attacks, or you can bust out Buster or whip up Cyclone for heavy damage. The Minato constantly evolves throughout the game and gives you new powers for different scenarios, making it a weapon that's constantly applicable. And later in the game, after some spoilers happen, you unlock its true power and overcome its handicap of not being able to hurt people, which I'm sure you can assume comes in handy a number of times. And all of this is without even mentioning one of my favorite parts about the Minato, its design. Whether you think it's clunky and awkward or slick and badass looking doesn't matter to me, I'm in the latter of those two camps. The red metal and blue neon lights streaming through it give it a futuristic look, and it opens up to reveal the actual blade, an ether beam that extends far beyond the reach of the metal of the sword. The panel in the center showing the arts with different colors and symbols is also a nice addition. And if that weren't enough, it has different forms, of which I will only show you two for the sake of those damn spoilers that keep cropping up. All of this comes together to make the Minato more than worthy of my #1 spot. It looks awesome, it's one of the most important factors of the story, and it's by far one of the most useful weapons I've ever seen in a game, let alone swords.